What has flying taught you about life? It's a completely different perspective on everything.
Yeah, so flying has this great lesson that it gives you. So what you do before you fly is flying is super rigorous. Like I didn't really realize this, but it's very demanding, and I it has a phenomenal culture of safety, and you're very influenced by the culture of the military too. And I told my instructor this week, I've spent more time following directions in the last 4 months than I have in the last 14 years because I didn't really follow directions. But once I get in a cockpit, I really need to. And one thing that flying does is you deal with checklists. It's sort of flying in surgery that are really dominated by checklists. And Atul Gawande talks about this in his checklist manifesto. And what you do is you go off and you do this pre-flight check before you take off. So you go and you sump the fuel, you make sure that the oil has enough, but not so much. You make sure that all the nuts and bolts are in. So you check the ailerons, you check the rudders, all that sort of stuff. You go and you check out everything individually and you follow this checklist. And I think this is how a lot of modern people think about life. They're going
Hmm.
to be very specialized and they're just going to follow the checklist. They're just going to follow the rules. And if all the little things make sense, then the big thing is going to add up. And it's a very sort of scientific way of thinking that has brought a tremendous amount of progress. But it's basically saying that what we're going to do is we're going to break the world down into its fundamental parts. We're going to focus on all those parts. And then we're going to make the assumption, and this is a big time assumption, that we can get from the fundamental parts to what the end result is. But if you study complexity science, there's an idea called emergence. And it basically says that more is not more, more is different. There are properties that emerge. This is why we can't break down all the individual parts of the brain and then recreate human consciousness. So back to flying. So what you do is you go around, and then at the end, you do this great thing where you just look at the airplane from 15 feet away and you just walk around. And I don't know what it is, man, but you always find something that you missed, something that you didn't check. You get this intuitive feel of, am I good to fly today or am I not good to fly today? And I think that as a society, we should normalize this a lot more. And this is part of the reason why I'm really into aesthetics as a way to think about how society is. Because I think that fundamentally, if a society is getting uglier, if a culture, its architecture, its roads, the way its cities are structured aren't as beautiful as they used to be, that's sort of like looking away at the airplane. There's no data, there's no charts, but it's like that feng shui thing, the quality without a name that Persig talks about in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, where you just look at something and you just have this felt sense. And I worry that the really checklist thing doesn't take advantage of that. And pilots know this very well. They've just never really expressed this, but it's baked into the structure of aviation.
So how do you bring that to your life in a day to day? That knowledge of the airplane, that knowledge of beauty that you've learned from airplanes. What have you done to bring that into your day to day life?
One time, I had a meeting with this educational PhD. She was a big deal. And the guy who set up this meeting was like, show up early, pay attention. This is going to be transformative for your course and for your business. Oh, great. So I skip over to the meeting, turn on Zoom. We start talking to this woman. She's got this big bookshelf in the back, super erudite, wall filled with degrees, all this sort of stuff. And she starts talking to us about what the business is like. How are we doing in terms of educating people? And she looks at my co-founder and director of student experience, Will, and she's like, "Hey, Will, how much experience you got?" And Will's like, "I have about 6 to 8 months worth of experience." And you could just see this look of judgmental disgust on her face. And Will starts feeling really bad.
Mm.
And, I'm kind of getting a kick out of it because I just love hanging out with people who are just nowhere near credentialed for what they're able to do. So we keep going on. She's like, all right, gents, what metrics do you have for your in terms of student outcomes, NPS score? How about how do you test students? What kind of surveys, questionnaires do you do? And we're like, ma'am, we do absolutely none of this. And so she's just like, who the heck are these people? And I mean, the background here is I run a writing school called Rite of Passage, and people seem to love it. And the business is really successful. We do none of these things because what we do is rather than thinking about things super quantitatively, we and surveying people and just dropping people with all that sort of stuff, we just get a bunch of qualitative feedback through the Zoom chat, through responses that we just curate, maybe emails that people send. And then at the end of every cohort, Will, who I talked about earlier, and we sit down and we go through every single relevant response and we read all of them. And we say, what are our priorities here? What aren't our priorities here? And then we just trust our gut for what to improve. And that's sort of that big picture thing. How do we feel? What was the vibe? What was it like for our students to go through this course? And then every now and then, a couple students ask for a refund, and we ignore 95% of refund requests in terms of having conversations with them and their suggestions. But what we do is when somebody asks for a refund that we think is really onto something, we listen. We really listen. And after our third cohort, or fourth cohort, actually, a student named Matthew, he gave us a refund, or he wanted a refund, and he hopped on the phone with us. And I remember I was sitting in Mexico City. We're having this conversation, and he's like, these are all the things I didn't like about the course. And I said, you're right about that. You're right about that. You're right about that. You're right about that. We wrote everything down. I responded to him with a full paragraph of all the things we were going to do. He was so heartwarmed by the fact that we actually listened to his advice that not only did he say, you know what, keep the money, but his girlfriend, who was in the course too, you know what, keep her money too, even though we both didn't like the course. And we just listened to that one piece of qualitative feedback. And from there, I went out and I built a whole writing curriculum. I probably ended up writing 70 articles about writing. And we just turned on a dime based on what he said. And I guess my point here is that one of the nice things about running a business that doesn't have millions and millions of people and doesn't aspire to take over the world is that scale dehumanizes things, and the human condition is not designed for scale. And so when you only have 350 or 400 students in a cohort, and you have alumni mentors that you trust, and you actually become friends with the students, and you actually get a chance to read their writing, and you get a chance to know a lot of your students, you can actually evaluate things qualitatively, and you can trust your intuition, which is really the wisdom of evolution. And then you don't need to be so numerical about things. And I think that that's why that PhD professor was just wrong. She was getting too scientific about things and not trusting the heart and the soul, which is what we try to do.